When little Daisy first traced her fingers through the backyard sand, no one imagined it was a cry for help from something dying quietly in the dark. Each night in dreams, stitched with silence and strange eyes, a gray dog appeared, never barking, never speaking, just standing there, showing the way. And by morning, the numbers came. Coordinates, codes, whispers from a place logic can't reach. What happens when a child hears what grown-ups have forgotten and what returns? When what was lost comes back to reclaim the memory. From high above, the Arizona desert looks like a parchment scorched by time. The land is vast, cracked and breathless. Sparse brush crawls across the earth like veins, and just there, nestled at the foot of a red rock ridge, is a tiny one-story house, sun-bleached and stubborn against the wind. It is alone. No other homes, no traffic. Just the whisper of the desert and the buzz of cicadas in the heat. And in the backyard, a little girl is kneeling in the dust. Her name is Daisy, 6 years old, barefoot with tousled blonde hair tied into a loose braid that bounces behind her each time she shifts position. She's wearing an oversized t-shirt with faded cartoon print, and her hands are covered in sand. Not playfully, precisely. She isn't just drawing in the dirt, she's composing, sifting the fine grains through her fingers, sculpting curves and symbols with the deliberate patience of someone decades older. And when she finishes, she sits back on her heels, examining the work like an artist, unsure if she's created something or merely uncovered it. It's a dog. Always a dog. Gray with pointed ears and a bushy tail, standing sentinel in front of a string of numbers. Not letters, not scribbles, numbers. 8 digits. Sometimes 10. Each day it's different. Each day she erases the old drawing before dusk and begins again at dawn. Inside the house, through the kitchen window, Ellie watches. She's in her late 60s, gray hair tied in a bun that's always falling loose. Her eyes are sharp, the kind that seem to read through people rather than look at them. There's something military about the way she moves, even now, retired and in slippers. She notices the repetition before she understands it. That same image again and again. The dog, the numbers, Daisy's fixation. Ellie doesn't interrupt. Not yet. She just watches. The house is quiet. It's always quiet. Daisy doesn't talk much. Not since her parents split and her mother took off to California. She's been here with Ellie for 7 months now. A quiet, solemn child, but not unhappy, just elsewhere. As if part of her lived in a different room or time. That evening, as the sun begins to bleed orange over the red cliffs, Ellie steps outside with 2 mugs of cocoa. "Looks good," she says, not unkindly crouching beside Daisy. The girl doesn't look up. "It's Echo," Daisy says, matter of fact. "He's showing me the way." Ellie pauses, mug halfway to her lips. "Echo," Daisy nods. "The dog." Ellie glances at the drawing again. "What way?" But Daisy doesn't answer. She leans forward and smooths part of the sand with her palm, erasing one of the numbers with eerie precision. Then she redraws. It replaces a 7 with a 3. She steps back again, satisfied. Inside that moment, Ellie feels it. Not just odd. Not just childlike imagination. There's a frequency to it. Something vibrating beneath the surface. Later that night, after Daisy falls asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, Ellie returns to the yard, alone. The stars above are wide and furious. She shines a flashlight over the sand. The drawing is still there. Fainter now, the wind gnawing at its edges. The dog, the numbers. There's something familiar. She kneels, her knees cracking beneath her. And from the hem of memory, it hits her. In another life, decades ago, she used to decode transmissions that looked like this. Buried in frequency, hidden in noise. Numbers that meant coordinates, passwords, access codes, or warnings. Ellie straightens her back. The desert wind whips her silver hair. And for the first time in years, the cold, sharp feeling of intuition pierces through her. She fetches her old notebook, starts copying the numbers. The next morning, Daisy is already out there, barefoot again, sculpting something new in the morning sun. Ellie watches from the porch this time, not just curious, engaged. The mug in her hand is forgotten cooling. Her fingers twitch. Her mind spins in algorithms. But as Daisy shapes the hind legs of the gray dog in the dust, Ellie notices something else, something subtle. The numbers aren't random. There's spacing, there's rhythm, and then she sees it. Each grouping of 3 could be a GPS coordinate. Ellie disappears inside the house, her heart suddenly loud in her chest. The old laptop boots, slowly groaning with age. She types the string of numbers from yesterday. The cursor blinks, then click. A satellite map loads. The red pin lands not far from here, within walking distance into the hills behind the ridge. It's nothing, just scrub and dust, but the coordinates are exact. Back outside, Daisy finishes her newest drawing. This one's slightly different. The dog's head is turned, facing east. Ellie stares. "Did someone teach you those numbers, Daisy?" The little girl blinks, puzzled. "No," she says. "Echo shows me in my sleep. Then in the morning, I just know." Ellie feels it again. That tremor, a knot twisting in her gut. She wants to believe it's coincidence or innocent mimicry. But Daisy's never touched a GPS, doesn't even know how to read yet. And the accuracy, it's not a child's game. That night she goes out again. The stars are brighter now, the silence deeper. The drawing has shifted slightly with the breeze, but the numbers are intact. Ellie copies them down. Her hands tremble. Inside, Daisy murmurs in her sleep one word: Echo. The next morning, a coyote howls far off in the distance. Ellie stands at the edge of the yard, watching the sun rise over the hills. There's a decision to be made. She hasn't been up that ridge in 20 years. Not since the fire. Not since the night she locked away everything she knew about the darker corners of her work. But Daisy doesn't even know what a cipher is. So how is she transmitting coordinates? Ellie opens her drawer, takes out her compass, her boots, and the notebook. The wind picks up again. Somewhere in the desert, something moves, and far below the surface of this quiet life, an old system is awakening. One number at a time, one footprint, one dream. The first image of Echo, still etched in sand, watches silently from the ground, and the story begins. The desert air turned cooler after dark, but the heat of the day still clung to the ground. Inside the small house, Ellie sat hunched at the kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of tea forgotten at her elbow. Her phone buzzed gently beside her screen, lit with the latest image, a photo she'd taken just before sundown of Daisy's sand drawing. She zoomed in. At first it was the same as always, the same gray dog rendered in long, sweeping arcs of sand standing tall alert. But tonight Ellie saw something that hadn't quite registered before. The numbers. She traced them on the screen with her finger. 3, 4, then a space. 1, 1, 0. Another pause. 2, 9, 1. She blinked. The spacing. It wasn't random. No child that age spaces numbers like that. She copied them down on a scrap of envelope, her handwriting stilted with disbelief. She sat back, heart ticking faster now. A memory stirred. Numbers with pauses like this meant grouping. In her line of work, her former line of work, it usually meant location data. Geographic coordinates. Don't be ridiculous. She muttered more to herself than to the silence. But the thought lodged itself deep. She got up, made her way to the living room, and pulled out her old laptop from the drawer where it had been gathering dust. The machine hummed to life slowly, like it resented being woken. The house creaked around her. A desert wind brushed the windows. Daisy was asleep in the next room, curled under the blanket with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Ellie glanced toward the hallway as the map loaded, then turned back to the screen. She input the numbers: 34.1x0291, 111, 429184. The red marker dropped onto a desolate patch of land just over the ridge behind the house. Nothing but rock scrub and scorched earth. She zoomed in. No structures, no roads, just emptiness. But it wasn't random. Ellie stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Could a child invent a sequence like that? A valid coordinate mapped correctly. She had taught Daisy some basic numbers for fun, but latitude and longitude, impossible. Unless she stood up slowly and paced. Her mind was racing now, gears turning like they hadn't in years. Not since her final decryption job, not since the defense contracts, not since she'd deliberately walked away from the world of codes and noise and shadowed consequences. In the kitchen, she took a shaky breath and sat back down. Another photo. Another sand drawing. She opened the folder on her phone. Every day, for at least 2 weeks, she'd taken a snapshot of Daisy's work just to humor her, just because it was beautiful haunting. She started cataloging the numbers. 14 days, 14 images. All of them had digits. And as Ellie copied them into a spreadsheet, the patterns sharpened. They weren't just coordinates. They were steps. Locations within a tight geographic boundary curving along the edge of the ridge behind their house. It was like something or someone was drawing a path, or leaving a trail. At that exact moment, a soft voice drifted from the hallway. "Are you looking at my drawings?" Ellie spun around. Daisy stood in the doorway, feet bare, hair tangled from sleep, one hand rubbing at her eye. "You should be in bed, sweetie." Daisy padded toward her without answering, then climbed onto the bench beside Ellie and looked at the laptop screen. Her face was calm, almost serene. "That's where Echo is," she said, pointing at the red dot. Ellie turned slowly to face her. "Who's Echo?" Daisy's eyes met hers. "He's the dog. The gray one." Ellie hesitated. "The one in your drawings." Daisy nodded. "He comes in my dreams. He walks around at night. He looks at me, then turns and walks away. I follow him. Then I wake up and draw what I remember." Ellie felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Do you know what those numbers mean?" Daisy shook her head. "Not really. I just see them. Echo shows them to me." There was no performance in her voice, no attempt to impress. Just truth, simple and terrifying in its purity. Ellie reached for her cup, but realized her hand was trembling. She put it back down. "Echo. He's not someone you've seen before, in a book, a movie." Daisy thought for a moment. "No. I think he's lonely. Lonely. He's been waiting. For a long time, he wants to come home." Ellie stared at her granddaughter, this gentle, strange, sand-covered child, who drew with precision that rivaled military engineers, who dreamed of coordinates, and who claimed a phantom dog was sending her messages from a place no one visited. And now all those strange feelings she'd tried to dismiss, the hair standing on the back of her neck, the way the numbers danced with intention, none of it seemed random anymore. That night, after Daisy went back to sleep, Ellie didn't touch the tea. She just sat at the table, laptop open, staring at the red pin on the map, the shape of the ridge, the proximity. The desert was quiet, but her mind was roaring. She opened her notebook, the one she hadn't written in since her retirement, and began to transcribe the coordinates. Each entry had a timestamp, a label, a possible direction. She circled the point from tonight's drawing. That location was only a 15-minute walk from their back fence. She checked the elevation chart. Low basin, slight indentation in the earth. Could be anything, could be nothing. But in all her years decoding enemy transmissions, she had learned one rule. Patterns are never accidental. And this child, this 6-year-old, was drawing patterns that even adult analysts would struggle to identify. Just before she turned off the light, Ellie scribbled one last note in the margin of the page. Echo equals probable contact. Verify identity. Investigate source. Proceed with caution. The pen lingered over the word contact. Contact with what exactly? At 2:16 a.m., Ellie rose again. She stood at the back door, watching the yard, the sandpit, the faint ghost of that day's drawing, still visible under moonlight. She thought of the way Daisy's hand had moved with such confidence over the sand, like someone tracing something already burned into her memory. Echo. The name echoed itself in Ellie's mind. Simple, hollow, haunting, and somewhere out there, beyond the reach of porch light, buried in rock and time and silence, something was waiting. A dog, a shadow, a truth. Tomorrow she would follow it. But tonight she stared into the dark and whispered under her breath, "Where the hell are you, Echo?" The morning broke pale and cloudless, the kind of still desert dawn that pressed silence into the bones of everything it touched. No birdsong, no breeze, just the brittle hum of heat building in the earth. Ellie tightened the laces on her hiking boots and slipped the old compass into her jacket pocket. Daisy stood beside her on the back porch, already barefoot, holding her tin lunchbox like it was a sacred artifact. Inside it, a juice box, 2 peanut butter sandwiches cut diagonally, and her small blue notebook filled with nothing but drawings, each of them a variation of the same theme, Echo, the numbers, the desert. "You sure you're up for this?" Ellie asked, her tone light, but her eyes watchful. Daisy nodded solemnly. "It's not far." They crossed the backyard without speaking. The low fence that marked the edge of Ellie's property opened into a scrub path, worn by time, but not traffic. Beyond that, the land sloped upward into a formation of red rocks and dusty ridgelines. Cacti stood like sentinels, frozen mid-salute. Far off in the distance, the peaks of the Superstition Mountains loomed hazy and indistinct. They followed the path traced by the first set of coordinates, an unmarked patch between two boulders just northeast of a dry wash. Ellie's GPS device blinked as they neared the spot. It wasn't much, just a narrow indentation in the ground, shallow enough to be missed by anyone not looking for it. They crouched there side by side. Ellie scanned the dirt for movement. Nothing. No recent tracks. The place felt untouched, undisturbed. Still, except there, Daisy said, pointing to a cluster of impressions in the sand. Paw prints. Not fresh, but not ancient either. Deep, large. The kind that belonged to a big dog. Ellie followed the trail with her eyes as it curved around a dead mesquite tree and vanished into gravel. Her heart beat faster. She took out her phone and snapped a few pictures. The tracker in her clicked on like an old switch. Shadows of memory stirred. Afghanistan, 1999. Tracking encrypted field signals across enemy lines using nothing but fragmented GPS and human instinct. Ellie had read landscapes like textbooks. Every crack in the ground had told her something. Now the terrain was whispering again. She just had to remember how to listen. But before she could analyze further, Daisy tugged gently on her sleeve. "Not yet," the girl said softly. Ellie turned. "What do you mean?" "It's not the day he shows up," Daisy said, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. "What makes you say that?" Echo told me. Ellie stared at her granddaughter. The girl wasn't playing. She wasn't fantasizing. There was a stillness in her, a gravity, as if she was simply repeating a message rather than inventing one. She glanced back at the indentation in the earth. The GPS reading was exact. The tracks were real. But there was no sign of life. No movement, no sound, just heat. Ellie stood up slowly and dusted off her hands. "We'll come back," she said, more to herself than Daisy. Daisy smiled faintly. "Tomorrow I'll draw a new map." As they walked back toward the house, Ellie's thoughts churned. She needed order. She needed a system, something to track, to measure. When they returned, she sat down at the kitchen table and opened a fresh notebook. She titled the first page, Sequence Analysis, Daisy and Echo. Each row was a date. Next to it, she wrote the numbers Daisy had drawn that morning, the direction of the dog's gaze. The small details was the tail raised. Was there a circle around it? Did Daisy seem tired or focused or frightened that day? Then GPS output, location, ground conditions, weather. She was building a data set, a cipher, just like the old days. But this wasn't a war zone. This was her backyard, her granddaughter. It terrified her more than anything she'd decoded under threat of enemy fire. Later that night, as Daisy colored quietly on the living room floor, Ellie stared out the window. The ridge was dark now, coated in silver moonlight. There was something there. Something pulsing beneath the surface of the earth. Not a sound, not a vibration. Something older than both. A presence. She remembered her first deployment. She'd been 23, green, arrogant. She'd thought cryptography was math and logic. She didn't know then that some codes didn't break. Some patterns weren't meant to be solved. Some were meant to be felt. That's what Daisy was doing, feeling it, channeling it. She wasn't inventing the numbers, she was receiving them. But from where? And more disturbingly, why her? Ellie looked back at the little girl on the carpet, who had now fallen asleep mid-sketch, crayon still in hand. The paper beneath her had another drawing of Echo's same posture, but this time the dog's mouth was slightly open, as if barking. No numbers yet, but there would be. Ellie gently scooped her up and carried her to bed, then returned to the kitchen. She flipped to a new page in the notebook. Patterns observed. Drawings always done before 9 a.m. Each coordinate sits within a 5-mile radius of the house. Directional gestures in the drawing seem to imply movement. East, northeast, recurrence of symbols. Spiral near left paw, zigzag at tail repeated. And finally, subject Daisy expresses belief that Echo communicates instructions directly, including timing. She paused, then wrote, "Not yet the day he shows up." It haunted her. She used to laugh at intelligence reports that referenced remote viewings or psychic transmissions. Fringe science, the stuff that never made it past black budget projects. But what Daisy was doing didn't look like invention. It looked like memory. Or worse, like reenactment. Ellie closed the book, locked it in the drawer. The desert outside breathed, and so did Echo. Somewhere, the sound of wind chimes danced lightly across the porch, brittle and distant, as Ellie poured 2 glasses of iced tea and set them on the picnic table. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the desert, brushing the tops of the saguaro cacti with gold. Across from her sat Hank Rivera, early 60s, square-shouldered with silver, creeping through his mustache and a badge that had faded with years of desert sun. Hank had once been a war buddy, or something close to it. He ran logistics, while Ellie cracked codes during joint operations overseas. Now he wore the badge of Maricopa County Sheriff, a quiet man with deep eyes and a practical view of the world. Ellie passed him one of the glasses. "I need you to take a look at something," she said, sliding the notebook across the table like it contained contraband. He opened it, flipping through the pages. Coordinates, timestamps, small sketches. Photos of sand drawings clipped to each entry with a paperclip. The detail was undeniable. So was the pattern. "She's 6 years old?" he asked, frowning. 6.5. Hasn't even learned subtraction properly. "But she draws those," Ellie said. "And every one of those coordinates is real. Inside a 5-mile radius. No repetition, no anomalies. Just intentional." He whistled low. "But why?" "What's it supposed to be pointing to? That's what I can't figure out. It's like she's mapping a perimeter, a net. But the source, the origin point, is always the same direction. North Ridge, just behind the 3rd outcrop. And the dog," Ellie hesitated. "She calls him Echo. Says he visits her in her dreams, shows her what to draw. She doesn't make up the numbers, she remembers them." Hank leaned back, sipping the tea. The ice cracked in his glass. "Ellie, I've seen kids invent whole worlds out of nothing. My niece swore there was a unicorn living in their air vent. This is different. She knows things she shouldn't. She's describing topography like someone with satellite access. You're spooked," Hank said gently. Ellie met his eyes. "Yeah, I am." He closed the notebook and tapped the cover. "I'll drive out there tomorrow. Bring a drone, maybe. But if I had to put money on it, she's picking up something from somewhere, TV, books, internet. She doesn't go online. I make sure of it. And besides, what kid spends her summers sketching grids of latitude and longitude in the sand?" Without asking why, Hank smiled, kind but unconvinced. "Maybe she's just special." Ellie didn't smile back. Later that evening, the house was quieter than usual. Ellie sat in her old armchair, watching Daisy at the dining table had bowed over her notebook. The child was completely focused, tongue caught between her lips, dragging the crayon with surgical care. A new sketch was forming. Ellie stood behind her. The dog again, numbers again. But this time, there were more. Longer strings layered like code. Daisy's tiny hand didn't pause once. "You okay, Peanut?" Ellie asked, voice soft. Daisy didn't look up. "He's farther away tonight. He's hurting." "Who is Echo?" Ellie sat beside her. "Can you tell me what you see when you dream?" Daisy nodded, still drawing. "It's not like a story. It's like standing inside a whisper. Echo doesn't talk. He shows, I follow. Sometimes there are people, but they don't see me, just Echo." Ellie exhaled slowly. "Do the people hurt him?" Daisy finally looked up. "No. But they left him. Somewhere dark. He's waiting." The child's voice cracked, and for the first time in all the weeks of drawings and silent afternoons, Ellie saw something slip through Daisy's calm fear. "Are they coming back?" Daisy shrugged, then whispered. "He says if I go away, he won't be found." The words hit Ellie like a weight. "What do you mean, go away?" Daisy stared at the dog in her drawing. "Mommy called today," she said. "She's coming. Wants to take me back to California." Ellie blinked. She hadn't heard the phone ring. "She talked to you. She left a voicemail. I heard it. She's flying in next week." Ellie's pulse ticked up. "Did she say why?" Daisy looked down. "She says I need a normal life, with school and friends and no sand." Ellie stood pacing now. She hadn't spoken to her daughter in months, not since the last screaming match about custody. Sandra had never understood Daisy. Thought she was too quiet, too strange. She'd never seen the girl for who she was, a mirror that only reflected truth. Ellie clenched her fists. "She's not taking you unless a judge tells her to." she said too sharply. Daisy didn't flinch. I don't care about her. But if I go, Echo dies. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a dramatization. The way Daisy said it, Ellie could feel the conviction like a current through the floorboards. The child knew. Later that night, Ellie sat at the foot of her bed with her old field journal open. She flipped through pages from 2 decades ago. Covert operations mission timelines, decrypted transmissions. Most of it was noise, but then her eyes caught a scribbled reference from 2005. Civilian informant in Tularosa sector claimed animal behavior shifted prior to cartel raid dogs barking without cause. One dog found pacing in figure-8 pattern in sand. She narrowed her eyes. She cross-referenced that note with another from an abandoned project she'd once been briefed on, an experimental study on emotional residue and non-human spatial intelligence. It had been canceled. Too weird, too fringe. But what if it wasn't? What if Daisy wasn't the one imagining things? What if Echo was the one remembering? The next day, Ellie pulled out her locked storage bin. Inside were maps, encrypted radios, her old field glasses. She hadn't touched them in years. But now she wasn't just a grandmother. She was back in the game. Because this wasn't about parenting or custody. This was a message. From the desert. From the dog. From something beyond explanation. And Daisy was the receiver. Ellie knew then if her daughter came to take the girl away, she'd fight. Because someone or something was counting on Daisy to listen. And Ellie had spent a lifetime listening to silence. The sun hadn't risen yet when Daisy finished the drawing. Ellie stood at the kitchen sink watching her granddaughter through the window. The child was on her knees in the yard, again sweeping her hand in wide arcs through the sand, not hesitating, not looking up. This time the motion was sharp, more deliberate. Not just placement, direction. When Daisy came inside, her cheeks were flushed pink from the morning chill. She set the drawing down in front of Ellie, 2 clean lines of numbers underlined and followed by a carefully drawn arrow pointing up and to the right. He's moving, Daisy said simply. Ellie scanned the numbers, already feeling her mind snapping into focus. 3rd set. Coordinates confirmed. Directional marker, east-northeast. She copied it into her notebook, then ran the numbers through the GPS tool on her laptop. The red pin dropped deeper into the hills than before. Not by much, maybe a half mile, but the terrain looked different, sharper. A narrow gorge barely visible from satellite view, a scar in the rock. She picked up the phone and dialed Hank. An hour later, his patrol truck rolled into the driveway. The sheriff stepped out, boots crunching on gravel drone packs slung over one shoulder. His face looked skeptical, but his eyes were alert. You sure about this one? He asked. She drew an arrow this time, Ellie said. It's not just where, it's when. He's on the move. Hank raised an eyebrow. You're talking like this dog's transmitting coordinates from a radio tower. Ellie just handed him the drawing. He stared at it, jaw tightening. They hiked out before the sun got too high, past the fence, past the previous 2 points, and farther into the canyon than either had been in years. The heat came on fast, swallowing the early chill, and the air shimmered above the rocks like smoke. Ellie's breathing was steady. Her boots found rhythm easily. She remembered how to do this, how to read earth and sky, measure silence, filter the static of thought until only the signal remained. At the mouth of the gorge, they paused. The GPS had them within 60 feet of the target. Ellie took out her compass. Check the sketch again. Up there, she said, pointing to a rock formation that resembled a broken tooth. If there's shelter, it'll be behind that ridge. The wind shifted, and they both smelled it at once. Death. Not strong, not fresh, but present. Something decomposing, maybe weeks old. Ellie's stomach clenched. Hank stiffened. You smell that? He asked. She nodded. Let's move. They rounded the formation carefully, boots crunching on loose shale. The air narrowed here. The light dimmed, and the path turned from dust to gravel to stone. A thin line in the rock, almost invisible, cut across the base like a seam. Ellie dropped to one knee, brushed the dust away with her fingers. A hole, no bigger than a crawl space. Maybe 3 feet tall, 6 wide. Natural by the look of it. A shallow cave carved by time and pressure. Hank knelt beside her, shining his flashlight inside. At first, all they saw was stone. And then movement, a twitch, a low, soft groan. The light caught on fur-gray matted dust caked. bones visible beneath skin, ears barely lifted. And then, eyes. Two impossibly bright blue eyes staring back at them from the dark. Neither of them spoke. The dog didn't move. He didn't growl. He just stared as if he'd been waiting for them specifically. His body was skeletal ribs pressing through the hide like fingers from underneath. But his eyes burned with something stillness knowing. Echo. Ellie didn't say it, but she felt it. So did Hank. The air seemed to shift around them, slow, almost reverent. "Oh my God," Hank whispered. Ellie moved forward slowly, crouching to the cave's mouth. "It's okay," she murmured. "We're here." The dog didn't retreat, didn't bare teeth. He simply watched her as if recognizing something in her face. Hank grabbed the emergency kit from his backpack, saline, a thermal blanket, a bottle of water with a nozzle. He kept his voice low. "He's alive, but he won't be for long if we don't move fast." Together they worked in silence. It took 20 minutes to coax him out. He didn't resist. His legs trembled, barely holding him upright, but he walked slowly out of the cave and into the light. And Ellie could see it now. The way the fur on his back spiraled in a unique pattern, like the wind patterns Daisy had drawn over and over. The same eyes, the same posture. It wasn't a match. It was him. They laid the dog in the back of the truck on a bed of towels. He didn't make a sound, just rested his head on his paws, those piercing eyes blinking slowly in the sun. As Hank climbed into the driver's seat, Ellie reached for her phone. Her fingers shook. She dialed the landline. Daisy picked up after one ring. "Hi, sweetheart," Ellie said gently. There was a pause on the other end. Then in a small voice, Daisy whispered, "You found him?" Ellie froze. She hadn't said anything yet. Not a word. Not a hint. Her throat tightened. "You knew," she said softly. Daisy answered without hesitation. "I saw it. He was lying down, and you had to crawl." Hank was scared but tried to hide it. Ellie looked at Hank, who glanced over with a frown. "She's saying this now." Ellie covered the phone. "She saw it before we got here." She turned back to the call. "He's safe now," she said, "but barely." "He's not done," Daisy replied. "He still has to show you." "Show us what?" But Daisy didn't answer. Only the soft sound of breath, and then the line went silent. Back in the truck, Ellie stared at the road ahead. But her thoughts were in the dark. There was something else out here. Something Echo had tried to survive to tell. The dog wasn't just a lost soul. He was a messenger, and Daisy was the only one listening. As they drove, the silence between Ellie and Hank wasn't awkward, it was charged. As if the weight of what they'd found hadn't fully landed yet. But it would. And they both knew this was just the beginning. They brought Echo home, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of cedar and dust. The truck rolled slowly through the dry backroads of Maricopa County, tires crunching over gravel desert wind, tapping against the windshield like fingers counting down. In the back seat, the dog barely moved his breath, shallow but rhythmic. Daisy stood waiting on the porch, both hands clasped tightly in front of her chest. She didn't speak as the truck pulled in, didn't blink. When Ellie opened the door and stepped out, Daisy moved without hesitation, barefoot over the hot porch boards, through the yard, past her grandmother, straight to the blanket, where Echo lay curled and silent. She knelt her little body, folding in on itself, and placed her hands gently on either side of his face. The moment their skin and fur touched, Echo opened his eyes. Blue to blue, recognition pulsed through the air like a jolt. Ellie felt it. So did Hank. Neither of them said a word. Then Daisy broke. Her small shoulders convulsed, her throat catching on a sound somewhere between sob and relief. "You came back," she whispered. "You came back." She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face into the mangled fur. Echo made a sound, then a low whimper, soft and alive. His paw moved just enough to nudge her foot. Ellie turned away, blinking hard. That night, Echo was given a corner in the living room. Ellie layered towels over the old sofa cushions and placed a water bowl beside him, along with a handful of food softened in broth. He ate slowly, carefully, his ribs still pressed against his skin like they were trying to escape. Daisy lay on the floor beside him, refusing to go to bed. Her hand rested gently on his paw. Her eyes didn't leave his face. "He knows me," she said, without turning. "Even if you don't understand how." "I'm not arguing," Ellie replied quietly. The next morning, Ellie called Dr. Jensen, the only vet within 20 miles who didn't make house calls, but owed her a favor from 2 winters ago, when she'd helped him track down a pack of coyotes that had been mauling livestock on his property. The vet showed up with a kit and a skeptical look. It didn't last long. No microchip, he confirmed after scanning. No tattoo, no collar, no ID. He examined Echo with a kind of reluctant awe. This dog shouldn't be alive. He hasn't had proper food in weeks. He should be blind from dehydration, but look at him. Echo's eyes met the vet's then. Long, still. It's like he waited, Jensen murmured. He did, Daisy said softly from the doorway. Jensen smiled, but it faltered. You the one who found him? No, Daisy said. He found me. The story might have ended there, at least for the town. A lost dog, a girl with drawings, a coincidence. Arizona was full of wild tales. But things changed when Ellie's neighbor Marlene came over with fresh bread and caught sight of Echo lying in the living room. Oh, my stars, Marlene gasped, stepping backward. That's the dog from the news. Ellie frowned. What news? Marlene pulled out her phone and showed her a post on a local animal rescue page. A hiker had posted a blurry photo weeks ago of a gray dog spotted limping near Dead Horse Canyon. Captioned, "Can't catch him, moves like smoke." Like he's following something. The post had been shared nearly 5,000 times. Dozens of commenters claimed they'd seen the dog before, always near the canyon, always alone. But no one could ever get close. The caption that had stuck was simple, "The ghost dog of Dead Horse." Ellie stared at the photo. It wasn't a perfect match, too grainy, too far. But the posture, the color, the outline, it was Echo. Word spread like fire through dry brush. Someone at the animal shelter contacted a journalist. That journalist reached out to a regional morning show. And by the following Thursday, a news van pulled up outside Ellie's fence. Just a short interview, the reporter said, microphone in hand. We'd love to hear how Daisy found him. She didn't find him, Ellie said. She mapped him. The cameras rolled. The story aired that evening. A soft featured news anchor smiled warmly as she recounted. A 6-year-old Arizona girl has captured hearts across the country after her mysterious drawings led her grandmother and a local sheriff to a starving husky, now recovering in their home. But here's the twist. Every drawing the girl made turned out to be a real set of GPS coordinates. She claims she saw the dog in her dreams. She calls him Echo. And many are calling her a miracle. The story went viral overnight. The words "sand code girl" and "desert dog dreamer" trended on multiple platforms. Some comments were kind, others weren't. This is staged. No way a kid draws coordinates without someone feeding her data. That dog's chipped. They're lying. She's clearly gifted. She might be a psychic transmitter. Where's CPS? Ellie stopped reading after that. The front yard filled with people over the next few days, neighbors, journalists, strangers. Some brought gifts for Daisy. Others asked questions. One woman begged to touch Echo's fur. A boy from Albuquerque offered to trade his skateboard if Daisy would see where his lost cat had gone. Through it all, Daisy remained quiet, polite, distant. She no longer drew in the sand. Echo never left her side. On the 4th day, Ellie noticed a man in the crowd. He stood apart under the mesquite tree, arms crossed, sunglasses reflecting nothing but the house. He didn't hold a phone, didn't smile, just watched. Ellie stepped off the porch and walked straight toward him. Can I help you? He turned slowly, removing his glasses. His eyes were pale, his voice clipped. You don't remember me, do you? Ellie stiffened. No, she said slowly. You should. You testified at the Fort Kittner tribunal. That name cracked through her memory like lightning through shale. She hadn't heard it in 20 years. Fort Kittner, the failed black site, the whisper of tech no one wanted to admit they funded. Projects involving neural mapping, animal cognition, childhood pattern recognition. The kind of classified science that ate careers and left trails of broken people in its wake. Who are you? She asked. The man ignored the question. The dog. You ever wonder why he came to her, not to anyone else? Ellie stepped closer. I'm not going to warn you again. But the man just smiled thin cold. She's not the first, he said. But she may be the last. Then he turned and walked back to the line of parked cars. Ellie didn't follow. She just watched him disappear into dust. That night, Echo barked for the first time. Not loud, just once. Sharp, directed. Daisy was asleep on the couch, but she sat upright instantly. He's back, she whispered. Who is the man in the dark coat? He was in the place Echo was trapped. He's the one that left him. Ellie swallowed hard. How do you know that? I saw it, in Echo's head. The silence in the house wasn't ordinary anymore. It was full of memory, of secrets, of something coming. And Echo, eyes burning like stars in a cave, watched the door, waiting. The man under the mesquite tree didn't come back. Not the next day. Not the next week. But the shadow of his presence lingered like a bruise under Ellie's skin. She kept looking. At every car that slowed by the house, at every face behind the crowd. She searched in reflections, in eyes in memory. And one night, she pulled a file from her attic that hadn't been opened in over 20 years. The case was labeled Operation Blindfold, Decommissioned 2003. She remembered the smell of those files, paper dust, and regret. She remembered the hush of rooms where no name was spoken louder than a whisper. The Fort Kittner program had died quietly, buried under false budgets and silence. But it had existed, and it had been hers, briefly, before she walked away. Inside the folder, she found what she needed. A grainy black and white photo, a holding facility in Arizona, unlicensed, hidden in federal wasteland. Concrete kennels, fenced corridors, a clipboard with obscured names. And in the corner of the photo, a dog, gray, thin, upright, eyes sharp even through the blur. Ellie stared at it for a long time. It was Echo. Same fur pattern, same ears, that tail. Her hand trembled. She flipped the page. Another photo. This one clearer. A teenager, maybe 15, holding a leash. Beside him, the dog. Same stance. The caption underneath read, Subject 7B, KRA. Echo hadn't just been lost. He had been kept. Ellie dug deeper. That same night, she accessed an old military database using credentials she'd sworn never to use again. Buried in one of the back channels was a digitized copy of a redacted report. It spoke of animal-assisted signal calibration and paired cognition mapping. The program had tried to weaponize something ancient, something primal. The loyalty of a dog combined with radio frequencies and trauma-linked pattern recognition. Children and animals, that's what they had used. And she remembered why she quit. She called Hank the next morning. You said you'd droned the ridge, she said. You find anything? Nothing live? Just a few carcasses. Some broken fencing like an old kennel got smashed apart. Ellie's voice lowered. Did you find metal tags? Pause. Hank answered carefully. Yeah. One had a number burned into it. 7B. Ellie closed her eyes. He was theirs. Who? Echo. That evening, Daisy didn't go outside to draw. She stayed inside, quiet, humming tunelessly. Fingers running over Echo's spine as he lay beside her on the rug. The TV played quietly in the background, some cooking show no one was watching. Outside, the wind was picking up sharp with dust and static. Then just after 10 p.m., Daisy stood up. She walked silently to the kitchen counter, pulled out her blue notebook, and began to draw. Not in sand this time, but pen on paper. Ellie watched from the hallway. The numbers came quickly. No pauses, no glances away. 8 digits. Then a space. Then 4 more. No directional arrows. No dog. When she was done, Daisy slid the paper across the table. Ellie looked at it and froze. The numbers weren't GPS. They weren't any coordinate system she'd seen in Daisy's work. They were narrowband frequencies. She recognized the pattern immediately. A long-range military radio code, not used in over a decade. But she knew it. Every encryption specialist who'd worked Black Ops before 2010 did. XHF 19. Channel 7. Secure burst. It was a call sign, a warning. Ellie's blood turned to ice. She ran to the garage, pulled out her field radio, the one buried under her father's old tool chest, and snapped it open. She tuned manually, fingers flying. The signal was faint, but it was there. A soft hum, then a pulse, then silence. Then again, 3 pulses, then a long tone. It wasn't random. It was intrusion. The old code for perimeter breach used on bases during covert animal transport when security around classified holding zones had been compromised. It was internal military slang. No one outside that world would have known it. Ellie sat back in the chair. The signal wasn't coming from her radio. It was being triggered nearby. Her eyes darted to the window. Across the road, a black SUV was parked in the dark. No plates, no lights, just idling. Ellie stood, heart pounding. She walked into the living room where Daisy was sitting with Echo. They're back, aren't they? Daisy asked before Ellie could speak. Ellie nodded. The little girl didn't cry. She just turned toward Echo and said, "We don't hide this time." Ellie picked up the phone and dialed Hank. No pleasantries. "They've returned. I've got proof. Frequencies. The SUV's across the ridge road. No tags. Black. Likely Fort Kittner remnants or subcontractors." Hank didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." Within the hour, his patrol truck arrived. They watched the SUV vanish over the hill before he could catch a license plate. But he scanned the tire tracks, marked the tread, photographed everything. They were testing the signal, Ellie said, seeing if Echo would respond. "To what?" "To them." Hank shook his head. "I thought that program died in 2003. It didn't. It just went darker." They stood in silence. The wind howled through the yard. Then Ellie said the words that had been clawing at her chest for days. "I think Daisy's connection to him isn't new." Hank stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I think she's one of the children they studied. Years ago. Somehow she was pulled out, maybe adopted without record. Echo was one of the last dogs assigned to her. They were bonded. Then something went wrong, and the program scattered." "You're telling me she's remembering things she shouldn't even know?" Ellie didn't answer. She didn't have to. Inside the house, Daisy was staring out the window, eyes unblinking, hand resting on Echo's shoulder. She whispered, "They want to take him back." Ellie stepped forward. "They'll have to go through me." Over the next 2 days, Ellie set up perimeter alarms. She pulled out every security device she had: infrared sensors, motion lights, trip cameras. She patched the system through her old laptop, rewiring it manually, just like the old days. Hank brought extra radios. They watched shifts, slept in shifts, but nothing came. Not yet. Just wind and signal, and the soft sound of Daisy humming beside the dog, who remembered everything. The night before the storm, Daisy drew again. Not a map, not a code, a face. A man in a black coat, eyes pale, standing behind a wall of chain link. Ellie stared at it and whispered, "Is that the one who left Echo?" Daisy nodded. "He remembers the smell, his voice, his hands. He used to whistle in the dark." Echo stood then, for the first time since coming home. He walked to the door, placed one paw against it, and growled, low, deep, almost human. Something was coming, and it wasn't just a memory. It was alive. The desert at night was never truly silent. It hummed with the breath of hidden life, cicadas low in the brush, the occasional distant cry of a coyote, the rustle of grit against stucco walls. But tonight, something was wrong. Ellie felt it before anything happened. A shift in the air, a weight in her chest. She sat upright in bed, heart thudding, ears straining. And then, a soft metallic clink, barely audible, the sound of a latch. Her hand shot toward the drawer. The pistol was already loaded. Down the hall, Echo's growl rose like a warning from the grave. Ellie moved fast. So did Hank. He was sleeping in the den's shotgun already slung when their eyes met in the dark. Then came the crash. Glass shattered in the kitchen, followed by heavy, deliberate footsteps. Not rushed, not panicked. Calm. Professional. They weren't robbers. They were coming for something, or someone. Hank ducked low, checked the sightline from the hallway. 3 figures, all dressed in black. Gloves, tactical boots. One carried a stun baton. Another had what looked like a small net gun. Animal retrieval. Ellie's breath caught. "They're not after me. They were after Echo." Then Daisy screamed, a sound that sliced through the dark like lightning through dead wood. Ellie moved, fast, into the living room. The front door was wide open, splintered at the lock. Echo stood over Daisy, fur bristling, teeth bared. One of the intruders reached toward the girl. Echo lunged, a blur of gray and fury. The man went down hard, groaning as Echo latched onto his arm. The stun baton clattered across the floor. Blood sprayed against the wall. "Daisy, run!" Ellie shouted. The little girl bolted barefoot out the back door into the yard. Her white nightgown snapped like a ghost in the wind. Ellie turned, fired one shot at the second intruder, just enough to slow him down. "Go with her," Hank shouted. "I've got this." She didn't argue. Outside, the wind howled through the cactus fields. Daisy ran blindly, feet pounding the dry soil, heading for the only place she knew would hold, the sand hut. It wasn't much a child's playhouse, made from scrap wood and tarps, but it was hers. Her sacred space. The place where the drawings began. She dove inside, breath-ragged hands trembling. She turned, expecting Echo to follow, but he wasn't there yet. Inside the house, Ellie fought to hold the doorway, yelling Hank's name over the roar of chaos. Echo broke free from the first attacker, just long enough to leap through the kitchen window, trailing blood, but still moving, still protecting. He ran after Daisy like fire through dry grass. Inside the hut, Daisy's hands moved before her mind could. She grabbed a handful of sand from the corner and began drawing. Not a dog this time. Not numbers. A circle. She dug it wide, scraping with her fingers, forming a shape older than language. Her arms moved with memory she didn't own. She whispered as she worked, "Stay back. Stay back." Outside footsteps thundered. Echo burst through the flap a second before the man chasing Daisy arrived. The intruder paused at the edge of the circle. Just one step, but he didn't cross it. Not yet. He stared at the sand, confused. His boot hovered above the edge. Daisy stared at him through the open flap. "You don't belong here," she said. "You don't know what he is," the man snarled. "I know what you are." He raised the net gun. Echo growled a deep guttural sound from somewhere deeper than his throat. The man stepped forward, and everything changed. The wind stopped. The temperature dropped. Inside the circle, the sand lifted just slightly, like it was breathing. Echo stepped into the very center of it. He stood tall, unshaking. The man fired. The net gun hissed projectiles, whipping forward, and then nothing. The net stopped midair, held, as if frozen. Time staggered. Ellie arrived just in time to see it, her granddaughter, eyes closed, lips moving. A hum vibrating in the air, not from her mouth, from the ground. She was channeling something. Echo stepped forward and bit down on the net, tearing it apart. The man fell backward, eyes wide. He turned and ran. The others inside the house were already gone, either fled or disabled by Hank, whose breath now echoed from the porch as he stumbled outside, bloodied but standing. Ellie reached. Daisy dropped to her knees. The girl opened her eyes. "It worked," she whispered. Echo limped toward them, collapsed in the circle, and rested his head on Daisy's lap. She stroked his ears gently. "He says they won't come back tonight." Ellie looked around. The wind had returned, but the threat was gone. For now, the night after the attack passed without incident. But the tension in the house did not. Daisy slept curled against Echo in the living room, one hand on his flank, the other gripping the corner of her sand-stained blanket. Ellie sat at the table with Hank and 2 federal agents from Phoenix who had arrived before dawn. One of them, a woman in her 40s, with a clipped tone and a badge from Homeland, was leafing through Ellie's compiled notebook like it was a relic from another war. "So let me understand this," the agent said, tapping a page. "You're saying your granddaughter not only drew coordinates that led to the dog, but she did so without prior access to any maps, data, or technology." Ellie didn't blink. "Correct. And you're also suggesting that the dog Echo originated from an undocumented government holding facility that doesn't appear in any official records." "No," Ellie said. "I'm not suggesting it. I'm telling you. And I was there." The room fell quiet. The agent raised an eyebrow. Ellie reached into the side drawer and pulled out a sealed manila folder. She slid it across the table. Inside, a photocopy of a redacted brief dated 2002, marked Confidential, Tier 3 Protocol, Nonlinear Pair Conditioning, AZ Sector D. A name stood out in block letters, E.R. Weston. The agent blinked. I was part of the decryption team assigned to monitor outbound transmissions from Fort Kittner. We picked up strange signal loops from an off-grid installation. Buried in the Arizona foothills, later identified as a subcontractor facility experimenting on neural linkages between animals and children. The program was unregulated, unfunded. It was shut down after an internal whistleblower exposed that some of the test subjects weren't volunteers. The agent leaned back in her chair. Hank, sitting across from her, asked the question hanging in the air. "What kind of test subjects?" Ellie's jaw tightened. "Infants, toddlers, children who'd slipped through systems, abandoned, unregistered. Some were brought in with animals, also undocumented. They called it paired imprint conditioning. The idea was to create a permanent emotional link between a child and an animal, and use that bond to facilitate signal transmission, location-based memory encoding, predictive pattern drawing, even remote influence through dream states." "You're saying," Hank began slowly, "that Daisy and Echo, they were in that facility?" Ellie didn't answer at first. She slid another photograph forward. A grainy surveillance shot. It showed a metal kennel half buried in shadow and 2 shapes inside, a small child swaddled in rags, curled against the body of a large gray dog. The timestamp read 03-1402. "Fort Kittner, AZ," Ellie whispered. "That's her." The room fell still. The agent reached slowly for the photo, then froze. "How the hell did you get this?" "I didn't steal it," Ellie replied. I buried it, along with everything else from that case. I thought, if it was sealed, it would stay sealed. But Daisy began drawing again, and Echo, he never forgot. The agent stood up. This has to go to federal review. Ellie rose, voice sharper. You don't get to review my granddaughter. She's not a file. She's not a project. She's a child. And what about the dog? The agent snapped. You think that bond just happened? No, Ellie said. It survived. They left just before sunrise, promised to investigate, promised to contact again. But Ellie had no intention of waiting for them to return. Instead, she turned inward toward the house, toward Daisy, toward memory. 3 days later, a call came from a contact Ellie hadn't spoken to in 15 years, an old handler named Keen. Cold voice, unlisted number, just like the old days. I heard about the animal, he said. I assume you heard about the child, too. I heard enough. The girl. Where'd she come from, Weston? Ellie hesitated. I don't know. There was a pause. I think you do. Ellie went to her filing cabinet after she hung up. Deep inside was a letter she'd received almost 7 years ago, slipped anonymously into her mailbox at the university. It was short, typewritten, no return address. Infant, female. Found near Route 60 west of Superstition Mountain. Estimated age 8 to 10 months. No ID, no report. Hospital refused intake. File closed. She cried when we took the dog away, but he didn't bark. He waited. On the back, scrawled in pen, find her before they do. She belongs to him. Ellie sat at the kitchen table that night and called Daisy over. The girl walked slowly, Echo at her side, as always. Sweetheart, Ellie said, I need to show you something. She opened the envelope. Showed her the photograph, the one of the tiny child curled in a kennel with a dog that looked just like Echo. Daisy stared at it for a long time, then whispered, I remember. Ellie's voice caught. You do, not like a picture. Like a sound. A smell. I remember cold metal. I remember being alone, but I wasn't scared. Because he was there. She looked at Echo. He kept me warm. Tears welled in Ellie's eyes. Daisy turned the photo over, tracing the scribbled words with her finger. I think he was waiting for me to remember too. Why do you think you started drawing again? Daisy paused. He needed me, and I needed him. Echo nudged her legs, soft and slow. The old bond not formed, but reawakened. Something no program, no black site, no experiment could manufacture. Something older than memory. Hank returned the next morning with news. One of the men arrested during the break-in had been flagged in a sealed court document from 2004, part of the original raid that shuttered Fort Kittner. He'd escaped prosecution by posing as a contractor. But DNA linked him to the same group of handlers that had disappeared children, trafficked untagged animals, and buried the evidence in desert caves and coded files. The man had been watching Daisy for weeks, waiting, planning. What do they want now? Ellie asked. Hank looked at her solemnly. To finish the work. Ellie shook her head. Not this time. That night, Daisy drew one final picture. Not echo, not numbers, not frequencies. Just a landscape. The desert, the ridge, a small child walking beside a gray dog under a sky filled with stars. No words, no symbols, just truth. And Ellie knew whatever they'd done in that place years ago. Whatever monsters had tried to tear them apart, the bond had outlived the program. The experiment had failed. But the connection had endured. The heat had softened by late morning. The Arizona sun, though still fierce, felt less cruel in early autumn. Light scattered across the scrubland in wide golden sheets, catching on dry grass, the rusted edge of old fences, the shimmer of lizards darting through shade. And in the heart of the quiet yard, Daisy sat with her legs crossed, a sketchbook balanced on her knees, her fingers dusty with pastel powder. She wasn't hurried. She wasn't guessing. She knew exactly what she was drawing. Her brow furrowed slightly as she shaded the curve of Echo's spine. He was curled beneath the tree, sleeping soundly, head on his paws, breathing slow and deep. A dog who had run through fire and silence. A dog who had waited years in the dark just to return home. Daisy added the last details carefully. A sleeping Echo, 3 figures beside him, herself, Ellie and Hank sitting in the sun together, not talking, just being, a moment outside of time. She blew gently on the page, and some of the color lifted into the wind. Ellie watched her from the porch. She was older than she'd ever felt, and more whole than she had in years. Coffee untouched in her hands, her eyes drifted to Echo again. He stirred just once, reacting to something in his dream, then settled again, as Daisy reached out and laid her palm softly on his ribs. The child's voice came through the stillness like a hymn. He says he feels warm again. Ellie rose, walked toward her granddaughter, and sat beside her on the ground. You know, Ellie said, eyes still on the sleeping dog, I used to think healing was about forgetting, about burying things. Daisy looked up. But I don't think that anymore. Ellie continued. I think healing is remembering without hurting. It's being able to sit in the sun with what once scared you and not flinch. Daisy leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder. He's not scared anymore either. No, Ellie whispered, her voice catching. He's home. They sat like that for a long time. The wind passed over them. Somewhere a hawk called from the cliffs. The land felt still, but not empty. Alive, present. Echo stirred again. This time he stood stretched and walked toward the edge of the yard. He stopped, turned his head slightly and looked back, waiting. Daisy stood. Ellie nodded. Go on. The trail to the canyon mouth had grown more familiar with every visit. But today, it felt different. Not like returning to a wound, more like returning to a door. One that had finally been left open. Daisy and Echo moved ahead in silence. Ellie and Hank followed slowly behind Boots, crunching over gravel sunlight slipping through scrub trees. When they reached the mouth of the gorge, Daisy paused. There, carved into the face of the rock, was a simple stone arch. Something Ellie and Hank had built the week before with their bare hands hauling field stones and scrap metal into the hills. A marker, a monument. On a small polished plaque embedded into the base of the arch were the words, Echo, người dẫn đường trong im lặng, for every signal that went unheard and every heart that waited. Daisy stepped forward and placed one of her sand drawings, laminated, now curled at the edges, into the crevice of the monument. It was the very first drawing, the one that had started everything. Echo and numbers. She touched the rock gently. He says thank you, Ellie swallowed. He doesn't owe me anything. Daisy looked up, eyes shining. He says, you brought us back. That night, Ellie sat alone in the living room, while Daisy slept in the bedroom, Echo at her feet. The dog had stopped growling in his sleep. He no longer paced. He simply rested. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt full. On the coffee table sat the open sketchbook. On its final page, no dog, no coordinates. Just a horizon, a road winding into it, and one small figure on a bike. The next morning, Ellie stepped out with a camera. Not her phone, a real camera. She hadn't used it in years. She snapped the shutter as Daisy pedaled down the dirt trail, her small backpack bouncing gently with each bump. Echo trotted faithfully behind her, his coat catching the light eyes focused on the girl like she was the only thing that had ever mattered. The path curved through open land framed by wildflowers and stone. The desert had never looked so forgiving, and from high above, the camera pulled back, rising into the air, catching it all. The house, the ridge, the monument, the dog, the child. A place where trauma had once rooted itself, now transformed by the simplest magic of all return. Daisy didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had Echo, and Echo had her. The loop was closed, but the road stretched on, full of sun, full of breath, full of hope.